Hey, Amy. Hello, everyone. Hey, Amy. Great to see you. I love the shirt. It says human
Thank
and
you.
kind. Oh
Human
my
and
goodness.
kind.
Oh, I
Very much
love it.
on brand.
Mine says love today. It's
Oh
love.
yeah, that's on brand, right? Love and human too, right? I love it.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it is on brand. I like it. It's an interest. It's a very milestone episode for us today. We're going to talk about that at the end, but we have some big news for y'all at the end of the episode. But let's get started on our last episode of April. It's already May. Holy shit. On boundaries.
Right around the corner. It's wild, right?
Oh, I feel like I was in January just celebrating New Year's. It's already May, but I'm excited. Summer is my favorite. So, um, setting steps into setting boundaries is today's focus. We've been talking about why boundaries are important, what are boundaries, how it has changed, and how it fits within empathy. And then last week Amy shared stories about how boundaries have played roles in our lives, in workplace and personal aspects. And then we also dove deep into the different styles of boundaries: rigid, permeable, or flexible. Rigid is like there's no room for negotiation. Permeable or unbounded, everything gets through. Boundaries are defined for you. People do what they want to you in a situation. So we have to understand what that's a style of boundary. And then there's flexible boundaries, and ones that come from listening to our internal voice that wants to protect us and wants us to experience growth. So these were the styles of boundaries, and we talked about these. And today's episode, we're gonna, Amy, understanding these different styles of boundaries, which is important because then we can know, am I being rigid about this? Am I just letting anything come through? And maybe it depends on the person you're with, and maybe I'm being flexible about this because of growth. But then today we're going to dive deeper into who are boundaries for, and what are the steps in establishing those.
Yeah, so it's really tricky to navigate boundaries as we're finding out. And this is my own personal project. So I'm doing stuff that hopefully you're doing things and trying to understand your boundaries a little bit more while I'm also doing the same. And I think it's going to be a longer term project for us. And what's interesting is that boundaries are negotiable, right? I think also what's interesting is that something that struck me when I was doing this work and research on this is being like, on one side, it's like, it's allowing you to have separateness from people, right? It's and deep down inside is about personhood, right? So you have this separateness that you have, but also closeness. And I think that's what's in my head right now, is being like, how do I create a space where I feel comfortable being separated from somebody, but also allowing for closeness? And that is a really interesting space to be in and navigate, and hard to do that. And you really have to understand yourself at the end of the day.
There's a quote I learned by Prentice Hemphill, amazing human. Prentice Hemphill, great work. And this is a quote I learned about, and this is what you just said made me think of it. So I pulled it up.
Yeah,
Boundaries is the distance that I can love me and you simultaneously.
I have heard that quote before. It's so fitting right now.
It is so fitting. Boundaries is the distance where it allows me to love me and love you simultaneously. And I think such a powerful message there.
Yeah. Like, what does that look like? And like when we talk about these boundary styles, like having no boundaries is a problem, right? Because you, over time, you might feel resentful, right? And you will feel resentful. You might feel angry. You might feel a range of emotions. You might feel like you're not being heard or seen if you are not chatting with somebody and telling them, right? And not only is it that you have to acknowledge what you're feeling and what you need, but you communicate that. So that kind of led us to this final topic for this month of like, really, let's break this down step by step on how do we actually set boundaries.
Yeah.
But before we do that, let's talk about who do we set boundaries for?
Yeah.
And, you want to start?
I mean, we've been talking about this, setting our own boundaries, right? That's the obvious one, the direct one. We set boundaries for ourselves. And that is where I think we start. And so I definitely think it's ourselves. Who else?
I think something to mention about boundaries is not just a boundary is about who you are in your body, and consent is a big part of it, but I would also say how you show up in the world. So
Mm,
it's just about this idea of like, we're talking about emotional intelligence. You start off with yourself and you're like, okay, who am I? Let's do some navel gazing. But then also you have to kind of think about like, as I'm engaging and
yeah,
engaging with the world, how do I want to show up in that world? So that's the two-sided thing of the about yourself. So
got
that
it.
would engage with like your partners, your family, your time, how much
Mm,
time you spend with people, and then also your work and professional life. And so a lot
yeah.
of people talk about work-life balance. I don't really subscribe to that phrase because it's like it's just all together. It's just being able to do the things that you want to do, right? And
Yes.
honor you and then honor me at the same time at the end of the day, right?
I had a manager recently who introduced a new phrase for me, which I liked, was work-life integration.
Yes, I've heard that too.
And where it's what you just said, do what you want to do when you want to do it, and focus on the outcomes, not on the hours, so to speak, if you have the privilege to be able to do that.
Exactly. And that is a good acknowledgement that a lot of these things are a privileged place to be, for a lot of places that we are. And so for those who have the privilege, right, like every day is a new day, and you can show up in a different way, right, for yourself and for
Yeah.
others. And that's something I have to constantly remind myself as I, navigate depression and anxiety in my life.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to go back to was the time boundary for time. I think that's an important one, because we like I think about it as like my friends or my mom or people would be like, why aren't you calling me? Or like, if you don't call your grandmother every month, whatever, like it's and I feel like it's a complex situation here, because we all have limited time. I think is something that um we are thoughtful about. Hopefully people are thoughtful about, and if they're not, there's because their circumstances maybe that don't allow them to be. But I think it's an important aspect to understand that, give each other the grace that everyone is trying to deal with boundaries of time. So
Mhm.
if it, and that is something that I think part of that empathy is like understanding, just like I'm struggling with time, maybe other people are struggling with time as well.
Mm. Yes, that really resonates with me deeply, and I have an exact story of something that happened recently in my life around that, because um around time boundaries, right? And like
Mhm.
I'm in a place right now where I'm actually having a lot more contracts and work that is being asked of me. I have a friend who unfortunately had been laid off in the grand scheme of things. And so my demands on my time are a lot different than hers. And it's been interesting navigating, and it's just like communicating has been really hard. And so over the course of a weekend, I was like, I'm doing this like self-care certification program, which I probably have mentioned before. And in that program, I needed to catch up on some of
Mhm.
the things because I was in, doing work stuff. And so I was like, I'm going to stay and have a rigid boundary this weekend, and which I didn't really think of it as a boundary, but it was, right? And I was like, I'm not going to introduce any calls. I'm not going to go out with friends. I'm only going to be here and catch up on my work and care about myself, right? But the thing is, I didn't communicate that to all my friends, right? Because like I don't necessarily need to do a public service announcement. I'm doing self-care this weekend. But over the course of that weekend, several of my friends, and one friend in particular, was trying to get a hold of me. And when I set aside some time on Sunday night to call her back, and one of the first things she said to me is she said, "Amy, you're being a bad friend."
Oh.
And it really hit me where I was like, I'm trying to do this self-care and I'm trying to take care of
Mm.
myself and try to be present and be here. And that is, I think, the death of it. Like, there's an expectation that I call back so soon, right? And I think that's the interesting thing when we talk about boundary setting, is that other people have expectations of us, right? um, around these things. And like, we also have to set the expectations and communicate those expectations to other people, right? So
Yeah, I
does
love
that
that
resonate, or
story.
is that is at
Yeah,
all?
that's why I brought it up, because this has come up in our themes in our conversations privately. So I thought it was an important aspect as well. But now let's jump right into what are the steps of setting
Okay,
boundaries?
yes. With a few next few minutes. So, as I was thinking about it and kind of reading up more about these in the books that I've mentioned before, I started thinking about I think there's 5 real steps that we have to do when we're talking about setting boundaries with people in our lives. And that first one is really trying to kind of do that navel gazing with ourselves, and understand, well, first of all, like, understand that definition of boundaries, right? The styles of boundaries, the types of boundaries that we talked about, right? And on this calls, on like the past few weeks of the things that we've been doing for boundaries, because if you don't understand what kinds of boundaries you can set, and like the style of boundary, whether it's rigid or permeable, or even like if you don't have a boundary at all, it's good to know that you don't have that, right?
Mhm.
The second step is to explore your boundaries, which are rigid, which are flexible, which are permeable, and then, like, if it's permeable, which are you leaving to chance if you're just unbounded and you don't have any kind of boundaries there,
Mm.
right?
What is an example of one in this could think of, like
Talking about an unbounded one.
yeah.
Mhm. Well, I think, going back to the story that we had last week, for example, is that when I was at this management consulting firm, I was totally in it. And what I was doing was literally being like, my worth was connected to the job that I was
Ah,
doing, right?
ah.
So whatever happened to the job happened to me. It took it very personally, right?
Mm.
And I have done that in a lot of my work, and it's really hard to decouple that with me. So for me, there is no boundary, because it's like, what if they would say jump, I would say how high. And that is just not healthy, because I then became resentful. I then became like, was being like, my life is only work, and I'm not getting paid enough to work 80-hour weeks, So a lot of things happen when you don't have those boundaries.
Yeah, of that. So we definitely want to explore what boundaries we have and what boundaries we don't have. And the way I think I do that is when I am going to new, because it's hard to do it like what all the things in my life, but as I take new steps, putting intention behind, like, what are my boundaries in this? Like, for example, we're going to this festival this weekend,
Mhm.
this erotic arts festival in Seattle. So it's like,
Mhm.
oh, this is interesting. But then it was like, who do we want to go with at this festival? And that
Mhm.
was an important question for us, because then that opens up different boundaries with different people, because it is a space that is very erotic, sex forward, sex positive spaces. So if I go into a space, taking friends that we want to cross that boundary with or not, or inviting friends in that, and will that signal? And I think that was another exploration. And then what ended up happening is we're like, you know what? It's just for us. Two of us, we're going to go together.
Mm. Yeah. And you can see how complicated it can get when you have a couple, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not just a couple, you're setting your own boundaries, but when you are a unit, right, of
Mm,
people, you have to be like, what are our boundaries, and
right.
navigate those, right?
Right.
And we're even doing that too with some of the things we're doing. So moving along, just to talk about the next 3 steps, and we're going through these quickly, but these are meant for us to sit down and really think through these bits and bobbles of it. Maybe we can put together like a worksheet around this. But number 3 is you have to communicate those boundaries. So once you have those boundaries, the people who are involved should probably know this is something, and you don't say this is my boundary X, right? Like, you could just say it in various ways, be like, this is what I would like to have happen, right? Um, and then once you do that, it's now, I call it boundaries in the wild. And you're navigating this wilderness of things that are in there. And it's like,
Mhm.
you're in the woods, you're navigating things are going to be coming out at you.
Mhm.
And and you have to kind of negotiate and kind of
Mm.
navigate those boundaries as you go forward. And so and then on top of that, once a boundary is crossed, how do you reinforce that and
Mm.
make sure those boundaries aren't crossed in the future and there's consequences for that? So
Yeah, I
that's
love that. And I think that's such an important aspect. Checking in with yourself is like when you do feel, how do we know when a boundary's crossed? When someone makes us feel uncomfortable, when we don't feel like ourselves in a space, when we think that something that we value is harmed or hurt. And those are early signs where like, hey, maybe our boundary is crossed, right? And when that happens, checking in with yourself is like, okay, what is the impact? Understanding it. And my recommendation is the reaction is going into an understanding and helping other people share your feelings. Like, this happened that made me feel this way, which crossed this boundary, and I want to share my feelings instead of attacking people. That's where the love part comes in. It's like, I want to share how this made me feel.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And then being like, and then you could do it in the space of like, this is a friendship or something that really matters to me. So I'm bringing this up because it's important for me to say this, right? And then I think that's even a boundary itself. Is like, for me, it's like I'm a highly sensitive person, so I can, and an empath, so I can really sense if something's off. And so for me, when I'm usually engaging with new people who could be friends of mine, I usually say, you know what, let's do some level setting here. If I'm probably going to do some sensing. I'll probably read into a lot of things when we talk about it because I'm hyper vigilant. But like, I just want to let you know about that. And, I might have to check in with you. And if there is anything on your mind, just talk to me about it. Right. Because before it gets to become such a big thing. Right. So those are just some of the things. I mean, there's so many different boundaries we negotiate every single day and every single week and year.
Right. Right. No, I totally get it. It's boundaries when working with like your boss or your employees, boundaries when working with your partner, with your kids. I think that's an important one that we don't like. It's unbounded with kids sometimes when we see parents, but then having boundaries with your kids helps your kids learn about boundaries and set boundaries as well.
I know. Yeah. That's where we were supposed to learn them to begin with. So,
Oh no.
yeah. So just to summarize all 5 of those steps, to have it in one place, and then I'm going to close the show. But step 1, understand the definitions of boundaries. You can go to the past few sessions that we've had to learn about all those stories and things like that we're talking about with boundaries. Step 2, explore your boundaries, the styles of boundaries: rigid, flexible, permeable. Step 3 is to communicate your boundaries to the people that you love, and communicate them to yourself sometimes too. Then step 4, boundaries in the wild. Learn and reinforce your boundaries as you go out in the world. And then step 5, check in with yourself. So to make sure that you are not just setting the right intention, but also paying attention to this intention you've been setting from the beginning.
Yeah. And we have a comment from Ashley. Thank you, Ashley. So true about boundary setting with the kids. We can role model what good, healthy looks like, and also practice setting and enforcing boundaries at the same time. Love it. Love it. Love you, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley, for joining.
That was it. So we spent a month, the last 4 episodes, is just learning about boundaries. What a powerful tool to be individual, to be our unique selves, to allow ourselves to be ourselves in spaces safely, comfortably. Amazing. Thank you, Amy, for the gift of bringing boundaries to us.
Thank you for being along the journey with me.
Oh, I have learned a lot. And I know we talked about our big news. Amy, do you want to go for it?
Sure. I guess the thing we wanted to share is that we have been doing some like internal thinking between us and thinking about our goals in the next year or so and beyond. And we've been doing this for more than a year at this point, which is boggles the mind. And so we have gotten so much out of this work, and also we are going to be transitioning. We're going to continue doing these empathy power-ups. We're actually transitioning from just a video podcast to actually a podcast. So I'm really, really excited about that. So The next time we gather in the middle of May. Sorry, I'm like getting my months mixed up. When next time we gather in the middle of May, we're actually going to be podcast first and be posting all of that. So be excited about that, and then we can get a better sense of the subscribers and get more people engaged with us as we go forward, and kind of lay down further plans for doing these little tiny bits and bobbles, like we are kind of like Kaizen, which is like the little continuous improvement that we need to do to become better humans. So that's the big surprise. Next week, we're not going to be having our weekly power up. Actually, from this point forward, we're not having a weekly power up at this time. We're going to be pushing out a weekly power up. So you can get it anytime, and you can come back to episodes as well. So am I missing anything?
No, I think we're excited for this journey. We love your feedback, and we'll create some ways to give a more feedback loop, right? Like here we get live chat, but we'll create some ways to engage as well. Thank you for everyone who's listening. Someone said boundaries help us gain perspective and integrity in the world of toxic coworkers. Yes, thank you. We see you. And we're excited about this new journey because we want to make this accessible. What we got feedback was content is great, but can't find it, or wish I was in a podcast form. So we're listening, and we're taking that feedback, and we're going to come back with more fun. Thank you, everyone. Love you all. Set boundaries.
Bye.
Love you.